Without too much ado, I want to set the stage for you. It's 1987. It is the time for the American Board of Surgery oral examination. I am a very, very frightened young man about to open the door, and it was Rochester or Buffalo, and I open the door and it's, "Hi, I'm Cy Schwartz." And that is not what you want to hear. That is absolutely not what you want to hear. And I can tell you, it's as you all know, it's the fastest hour and a half of your life. But for me, it was particularly the fastest, 27 minutes of my life. And he asked the last question and about thrombocytosis. And, I said I was going to give the patient aspirin. He looked at me and he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, it's in your book." And he let me out the door. So, so that's my first face-to-face, and so it's really it's a privilege and an honor to be able to also name you one of our icons in surgery. And special thanks to Jacob, who's going to introduce the video. So without any further ado, Jacob Moalem, who produced and created the video for Dr. Seymour Schwartz.
Good afternoon. It's a real privilege to stand here before you and to introduce my mentor, my friend, my hero, Dr. Schwartz. Before doing so, I'd like to make two comments. First, to thank the college for this incredible program where we get to celebrate absolute giants and heroes and treasures in American surgery. And so if there's anything that anyone in the room can do to help push this program forward, that would be greatly appreciated. And the second would be to congratulate Dr. Newman for her being honored today. Congratulations. And with that, I'd like to just introduce Dr. Schwartz. In the world of surgical giants and icons, Seymour Schwartz has few equals. This video honors and defines the man, the surgeon, the academic leader, and the author. A Renaissance man with an endless, expansive curiosity who has achieved mastery in not one, but three realms: surgery, cartography, and history. Dr. Schwartz is a treasure to be appreciated, and we are honored to share his story through this tribute from his friends at the University of Rochester. His story began in January 1928, when Seymour was born to Samuel and Martha Schwartz. His father, a Russian immigrant, was a physician with a small practice and an intellectual who frequently hosted philosophic discussions in their small walk-up apartment in the Bronx. Amid walls and closets overflowing with more than 6,000 books, notable guests such as Cardinal Spellman would debate and leave an indelible mark on young Seymour.
I went to public school and was informed from very early that the only way I could succeed in life was by doing better than other people in my studies.
And excel he did. After giving the valedictory address at grade school, he enrolled at DeWitt Clinton, an all-boys high school where he finished third in a class of 600 students, was a star on the basketball team, and medaled several times in debate competitions.
My father had left when I was 13 and a half as a physician and served in the South Pacific, and I was actually missing in action for 5 days when his hospital ship was sunk by a kamikaze attack, and we saw his name in the New York Times as missing in action, but obviously he survived, and I didn't see my father for 3.5 years till after the war.
He went on to be accepted at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a full scholarship. There, he met Dr. Lalish, one of his first and most influential mentors.
I wrote a paper with him on hemoglobinuric nephrosis, which could be ameliorated to some extent by alkalinizing the urine. And it was unusual for an undergraduate to write a research paper, and I think that was very influential in my life.
In Madison, he completed his undergraduate degree in 2 years and got far more than just an education.
It was there that I met my wife, who came from a small farming town in Wisconsin, and she too was the first person to go to college. There was a dance that you could go to at the Union for 10 cents. Her roommate had a date. I said, "Do you know how to dance?" And she answered the phone. She said, "Of course." And I said, "Well, are you free tonight?" And she said, sure. So we went out.
Their romance flourished in medical school at Syracuse and later at NYU. Wishing to be transparent about their relationship on their residency applications, a move which ultimately severely limited their choices in residency positions, Seymour and Ruth were married during their third year of medical school.
I wanted to do neurosurgery. She wanted to do OBGYN. There was no match, of course, no interviews. And there were only two places. We were not allowed to work in the same hospital. We were accepted in Minneapolis, she at Hennepin, and I at the University of Minnesota. We were accepted at Rochester, she at Genesee Hospital, and I at Strong. And we actually tossed a coin and came to Rochester. We started with 12 interns in surgery, 2 of whom were slotted to go on in OBGYN. 10 were competing for 1 to 2 positions out of that group.
Dr. Schwartz survived that steep pyramid, and after a 2-year tour in the U.S. Navy, came back as chief resident. He joined the faculty in 1957. Sadly, Dr. Schwartz faced additional unanticipated challenges too.
In 1958, I was a junior instructor. We didn't start out as assistant professors. I had not done anything of consequence. I had not become a Markle Scholar, but I was the most junior member of the faculty. And we were considering the match. And we had a chap from Cornell who was #1 in his class, had scored #1 on 4 of the 5, or 5 of the 6 clinical examinations, part 2 of the boards, and had co-authored a book on the parasites of the heart as a medical student with a professor of medicine at Cornell. And the person who was the acting chair of the department at the time, whose name will not be mentioned, came out with a statement, we can't take him because he's a New York City Jew. I was flustered, turned red, and I said, I have no tenure. I'm really the youngest person. I resign. Probably the worst time of my life. I said, you took me, and it kept me on the faculty, and to hear this, I can't sleep on my pillow. I remember saying that. And John Schilling said, I'll never forget it. He said, why do you think we took you? I said, well, I had done research, which was acceptable, and I was in AOA, and I had been Phi Beta Kappa, and I attributed all this to scholarly pursuits. He said it had nothing to do with that. The year I was being considered in the non-match, somebody had said, S.I. Schwartz is the 11th ranked tennis player in America, let's take him. So I came to Rochester on an absolute fluke.
Although Dr. Schwartz was not the famous player he was confused for, he was ultimately convinced to stay on the faculty and rapidly proved to be a superstar in his own right. In 1964, 7 years into his faculty appointment at the University of Rochester, his first textbook was published.
This was the first English book on liver surgery. Tom Starzl wrote the section on transplant before he had any success, and I wrote most of the rest of it.
5 years later, the first edition of Principles of Surgery was published. This book defined a new standard and broke all publishing records for surgical texts. To this day, 50 years later, the book is still known as Schwartz, or the Bible of Surgery, and has sold more copies than any surgical text in history.
At that time, Harrison had become the most popular book of medicine, was published by McGraw-Hill, and they wanted a companion book in surgery. So they selected 5 individuals to form an editorial board. Consisted of Rich Lillahei from Minnesota, Frank Spencer, Tom Shires, myself, Ed Storer from Yale, and David Hume from Richmond. I was the only one who wasn't a chairman and had no administrative responsibilities, and they said they would all come on if I would accept the editor-in-chiefship, which I did. So I essentially wrote every word from their original text.
Ever the perfectionist, Dr. Schwartz is celebrating the 50th anniversary by publishing a monograph on the statements in the first edition that have since been shown to be wrong. Dr. Schwartz proceeded to edit the next 7 editions of the Yellow Book, in addition to 2 editions of Mango's textbook of abdominal operations and 8 other surgical texts. He also served as editor-in-chief of the Yearbook of Surgery for 21 years and of the Journal of the American College of Surgeons for a decade. Over that time period, he also served as president of America's 3 most distinguished surgical organizations: the American Surgical Association, the Society for Clinical Surgery, and the American College of Surgeons. In 1986, he was presented with the American College of Surgeons Distinguished Service Award. Back home in Rochester, Dr. Schwartz rapidly rose through the ranks and ultimately became chair of the Department of Surgery in 1987, where he really put our department on the map, both nationally and internationally.
DSI, our friendship started almost 50 years ago when I, in 1968, received a research fellowship under your supervision at Strong Memorial Hospital. The fellowship was the start of my international academic career. My time with you coincided with the release of the first edition of your Principles of Surgery in 1969, the leading textbook in surgery in the world ever since. I was followed by 7 Swedish surgeons whose career was boosted under your tutorship, strengthening the relationship between American and Swedish surgery. Your contributions to generations of surgeons across the globe are truly iconic, and you, my friend, are most deserving of this tremendous honor. Skål.
I have known Dr. Seymour Schwartz for more than 50 years as intern, resident, and attending. He has always shown a deep and sincere respect for women. His protective nature is subtle, but always present. A woman's professional status matters not. Dr. Schwartz always addresses each individual by their surname with the prefix of either doctor or Ms. Even more striking is the fact that he expects and demands that his colleagues show the same respect. If they fall short, they are quickly reminded that their behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. It matters not if they are male or female. Dr. Schwartz is a true icon in every way.
A traveling surgeon, Dr. Schwartz has given nearly 200 invited lectures across the United States and internationally, and was conferred numerous honorary memberships and degrees.
I regard the residents that have come out of the Rochester program as a major legacy that I've had. The most impressive surgeon with whom I worked was George Emerson, who was a thoracic surgeon who never got his boards because he failed the oral exam, and he had an extraordinary personality. He was the calmest person I know, and actually the best technical surgeon. Dr. Rob gets a lot of credit for our vascular program because he was a notable vascular surgeon and a raconteur. Jim DeReese, I think, was the one responsible for the vascular reputation of our institution. Jim Adams, who operated on me, was quite different in personality, but probably the best teacher of residents I've ever encountered. It was a different time. As you know, surgeons could spend more time in the operating room, and there was less paperwork. Jim Adams, my closest surgical companion, and I came in every Saturday morning and saw patients, each other's patients, together with the residents, and presented purposely different attitudes to teach the residents. I can't remember a day coming to work that I didn't enjoy.
Not infallible, Dr. Schwartz did make one costly mistake.
I had one patient in whom my technical error resulted in the demise of a patient, and I still wake up with nightmares 50 years later, having made that mistake. 1963, I was an associate professor, had just received tenure, and we were celebrating at home on a Friday evening. My wife, Ruth, said I needed a hobby. I said, fine, go out and get me one. She went to an old bookstore, secondhand bookstore called Gilby's, and bought an English book on cartography. I actually had never heard the word before. I started collecting with a $15 map, which I bought at the Argosy bookstore in New York. Then I began to get more knowledgeable, and I started to collect maps of America at a time other people weren't doing it. I've never sold a map. I've been offered a lot of money for some of the maps, and I will never sell a map because it's part of my religious experience, actually. And I was fortunate enough, my most important map is the map done by George Washington when he was a 20-year-old on the eve of the French and Indian War. There are only 2 copies of this manuscript map. I'm fortunate to have one, and it'll be deeded to the University of Virginia.
Dr. Schwartz's fascination with the mapping of America led to his authorship of 3 other cartographic masterpieces, including The Mismapping of America, Putting America on the Map, and This Land is Your Land. In addition, he authored 5 other major historical texts, establishing him as the authority on American cartography and history. In recognition of his incomparable expertise, he has been appointed to the board of the National Museum of American History of the Smithsonian Institute, and was conferred memberships in the Institute of Medicine, the Library of Congress, and the Philosophical Society, where he holds the distinction of being one of only 3 surgeon members.
I do love history. I think it's important because history of surgery, history of medicine, history of care of patients, history of humanity adds a dimension of romance. And for me, it's added to the romance of being an academic surgeon.
Although Dr. Schwartz achieved international fame as an author and scholar, the most joyful moments of his career were in the operating room.
Realize that your legacy as an academic leader is to create a new generation of surgeons, and that's your obligation. And you can only do that if you've experienced all of the problems than the ordinary surgeon does, and that requires operating. Had I not been considered by my residents as somebody who could operate equally well with anybody else in that area, I would have thought I was a failure. My wife was an OBGYN, very accomplished surgeon, and highly regarded, actually much more notable in this community of Rochester than I was. She was beloved. I think Ruth was responsible for any success that I had, and for our children too. I won in a poker game in Italy. I was aboard a TAC transport that carried 400 Marines. We played poker essentially every night. And one night, I think it was a captain or a major of the Marines, owed me $100, and he said he foolishly had bought an accordion. Would I take it in lieu of $100? And I said, sure. And then I started to play the accordion. Comments have been made by friends that if I hadn't spent so much time practicing the accordion, which I do every day for an hour and a half, I might have accomplished something.
Today, Dr. Schwartz remains an active, vibrant, and critically important part of our department. He is in his office 6 days a week, always early, and contributes brilliant insights to our educational conferences. We all marvel at how a man can so easily recall names, facts, and specific events from 70 years ago, and elegantly weave these ideas with his comprehensive knowledge of today's science. A true genius, I often think that he's forgotten less than I have ever learned.
In closing, I want to thank the American College of Surgeons for honoring our beloved Dr. Schwartz as an icon in surgery. For me, being named the Seymour Schwartz Professor of Surgery is certainly the highest honor of my career in academic surgery, and I strive to emulate his unyielding commitment to excellence every day. As a mentor, sage advisor, counselor, and friend, I'm so grateful for all that he continues to give to me personally, to the University of Rochester, and to our larger community of surgeons. Scholar, innovator, author, historian, musician, educator, leader, a truly remarkable man. We are so much better because of the exemplary way he has led his life, and I look forward to many more years of his remarkable contributions.
I had not anticipated speaking. Jacob said that would not be required. I'd first like to thank him for all his efforts and others at the university in making this video, which I had not seen before. I'm listed as a Renaissance man. That's appropriate in only one regard. That's the period when I was born. I look down at some particular friends in the audience, Professor Bismuth, and am reminded of many times we spent together and my admiration of him, and a statement made by one of the few people more famous than Henri Bismuth, Louis Pasteur, who said, "Chance favors only the prepared mind." That's wrong. My mind was certainly unprepared, and chance favored my entire career, as was indicated at the very beginning. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also recognize a very close friend of mine, perhaps more notable than I was at the very beginning, and who has contributed so much to liver surgery, also Marshall Orloff, who's here at this moment, and so, who has created so much in this city. I'll use Marshall and Anne for an entree into one story, and that will bring it full circle, I hope, to women in surgery. Marshall and Anne spent, I think, 14 days with us, Ruth and myself, in Papua New Guinea during warfare between two tribes, in which Ruth left our bus and took pictures of the two fighting tribes as the spears and the arrows came coming over our heads. And Marshall and Anne, I think, will authenticate that occasion. And that leads me into comments regarding Ruth, who unfortunately passed away about 2 decades ago. She was a member of the American College of Surgeons. She was the second female member of the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and much better known than I was. But more important, as far as legacy is concerned, I do think that my most significant legacy is that my children, the 3 boys, have done so well, and have done so well for only one reason, that they didn't listen to my direction, but rather hers, and that proved to be successful. And I've been fortunate afterwards to have met Lynn Kaiser, and it is she who is the author of the statement, "If I hadn't spent so much time trying to learn to play the accordion, I might have amounted to something." So thank you very much. Thank you. Don't leave.
So we have the opportunity for people who would like to come up to the microphone to relate their experience or make a comment. And so this is, we record all of these. For those people who want to show any of these videos from the icons, they're available on the college website. Feel free to download. We are creating enduring materials to not forget our icons. From the first microphone.
I'd just like to thank Professor Seymour from the other side of the world, where I was in 1982 when I was chief resident in Johannesburg under Bert Meiberg, when I had the privilege of having lunch with Dr. Seymour, and I think you stimulated me to take a big interest in research and in writing, and I want to thank you very much for that, sir.
Thank you. Could you just, before you leave, can you just tell us your name and where you're from?
Gideon Nade, I'm from Sonora, California, where I'm a general surgeon in practice, previously from UCLA, where I was on faculty.
Thank you. From the second microphone, don't forget to introduce yourself.
Bob Nesbitt from Augusta, Georgia. I'd like to thank the college for having this program. It's been outstanding and been particularly meaningful. And I want to thank Cy. But my son also had the good fortune to train in Syracuse when Pat Newman was there. And she had a big influence on him, and she was one of his favorites. So I thank the college particularly.
Thank you. From the front microphone.
Hi, my name is Jacob Moalem. I'm from University of Miami. Dr. Schwartz, I was born in a mountain town in Nicaragua, and I always wanted to be a surgeon. And I was able to get a hold of one of your books, and I would read it. It was in English. I was able to read in English, and I would read it. And I remember that was one of the greatest treasures I had. And being today in front of you, you have no idea how meaningful this is for me, to be part of the college, to be here, and to be in your presence, and knowing that that book is what I started loving surgery. So thank you very much.
From the back microphone.
Dr. Schwartz, I'm Jeff Tallman, a fellow Navy surgeon, neurosurgeon here now in San Diego with the Navy, who trained at the University of Rochester under Dr. Webb Pilcher. And I just wanted to thank you for your leadership at the University of Rochester to secure neurosurgery and assist with that, their transition to being a full department. It was very common to see open door towards the general surgery department as we ferried to and from the neurosurgery division at the time. And I was always reminded by the residents who were there in the general surgery program who helped us so much of your strong leadership in their development. So as a fellow Navy doctor and as a University of Rochester alumni, I thank you for your service and your leadership.
From the front microphone.
Dr. Schwartz, I'm a Mexican surgeon, and I remember that you went to Mexico several times to teach us. I met you in Guanajuato for a meeting of the Mexican Association of Surgery, and we got a great time. I also want to tell you that I've read your book for 3 or 4 times, and I presented my American Board of Surgery. I was trained in New York, and I passed it very easily because your teachings after I read the book. And I can tell you that Your textbook is still the favorite surgical book probably in all Latin America. And also I heard you in the ABC hospital not too long ago. You talk about cartography and American history, and it was also very great. And in name of the Mexican surgeons, I congratulate you this time.
And we'll take our final question for this session from the back microphone.
Professor, I'm coming from Turkey, and I'd like to thank you in behalf of all Turkish surgeons because of your great book. Thank you very much. It's really enlightening for us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. One last question.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Johnson, and first of all, welcome everybody. I live in San Diego. If you like the weather today, come back in January, February. It'll be a day like that then too. But I graduated from Rochester in 1970. Dr. Schwartz was one of the major influences why I decided to go into surgery. I trained at UCLA in Dr. Longmire's program, another Renaissance individual. I've had a lot of firsts in my life, and as an African American, I want to say to Dr. Schwartz and also to Dr. Newman, I want to thank them for spending their entire life quietly mentoring people who don't look like them, aren't trained, haven't come from the same background. While I was the first African American in UCLA's program, while I was there, the first Chinese American, Japanese American, and woman also came into that program. Dr. Longmire was also an enlightened individual who quietly helped move things ahead. So I want to thank both of you for having that.
Thank you so much.